The principal's
See you
report.
guys.
We gotta go back to page, Kristen, you're on.
We're on page 15.
Page
15.
Any introduction?
This is Miss Kylie Gregor, our new assistant principal for curriculum and instruction.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
We have quite a bit to report out on tonight, so first, just an update on some building events. Last Thursday, we took 36 students to Iron Oaks for leadership, communication, and team development training through their environmental activities that they have set up, and students were selected based on teacher nominations. Some students were newly selected leaders through freshman officers for student association, which you heard about, and a majority of the students were students currently not involved in an activity here at RB. So the purpose was to foster a sense of community with their peers and to engage them within the school to hopefully translate to getting them engaged when they came back to the community at RB. So this was possible due to the funding of PTO. So we greatly appreciate their support in this, and we plan to follow up with the students by having monthly lunch meetings with them as a group to build that sense of community among the students, but also to check in with them and see how they're doing. We're also in the process of creating an attendance mural. So Marianne, if you could post that picture. So this is courtesy of Mrs. Zimmerman and her students in her 5th period art class, and this is in the cafeteria. And so the point of the mural, it's not finished yet, they're in the process of painting it. But the purpose of the mural is to have students within each lunch period compete against one another as an entire period to reach certain percentages for their attendance based on the previous week. And so incentives will include simple things from playing music in the cafeteria that period or letting them eat outside. But the students are excited about this and have been watching it go up. So that should be ready by the end of the week. This year we've been trying to increase communication with students and parents. So we have 3 Twitter accounts. I have one, we have one for the Assistant Principal of Student Affairs, and we have one for athletics. And it's also a feed on our website, so even if you're not familiar with Twitter, you can go on the website and see some of the activities that are going on throughout the building. We also have redesigned the activities website for students and are looking at reorganizing some information on our current school website to make some of that information easier to find as well. Fall sports and activities are well underway. We have over 500 students participating in a fall sport, and that's up from last fall, which was about 450. We don't know how many students are involved in activities right now because they start at different points throughout the year, but we did have an activities fair 3 weeks ago in the cafeteria to increase involvement. And then also our fall play was announced. It's The Great Gatsby, and the cast list was posted a little over a week ago. So those practices have been up and running, and the fall play this year will be November 12th through the 14th. Student Association filled you in about homecoming that we have next week. In addition to the game and the stadium dedication, we also have a pep assembly that the students are really excited about, and homecoming court was announced today as well. Parent Technology Series. We have our second meeting at 6 p.m. on Monday, October 5th to meet with the parents and talk about how they can use technology at home to help their students be more successful academically. And that's paired right before the PTO meeting. Hopefully get parents to attend both of those meetings. October 1st, we have our first orchestra festival, and that's at 7 p.m. and that's where RB students will perform with Hauser students. And then October 7th is our fall choir concert. So those are some of the events we have going on in the building, but I have some more updates for you as well. At the last board meeting, Dr. Keene had asked for an update on the civics requirements. So in August, House Bill 4025 was passed, and that requires the civics graduation requirement, and I'll explain what that is, but to take effect January 1st, 2016, so in the middle of the 2015-16 school year, to affect the current students that would graduate in 6 months. So as a result, there's a new bill that's trying to be passed that would have this requirement go into effect with the class of 2020, so the incoming freshmen next year. So that's in the third and final reading in the Senate, so we hope that that will get passed, and that will start with the freshmen that will come in next year. For a lot of schools, this is a big adjustment because it's requiring a civics class that it says specifically the purpose of the new requirement is to help young people acquire and learn the use of skills, knowledge, and attitudes that will prepare them to be competent and responsible citizens throughout their lives. Civics course content shall focus on government institutions, the discussion of current and controversial issues, service learning, and simulations of the democratic process. We cover all of that already in our US Gov course with the exception of the required service learning component. So for us, it would be very easy to comply with this, but for many other schools that don't require a US Gov course, that would be very difficult for them to do with such a short time. So in the future, I envision us possibly having to change the name of our US Gov course to add civics in the title. I think that would be easier to show that we align to the graduation requirement. So that's the update we have right now on that, and I'll keep you updated as more information becomes available. The next report is the transfer enrollment summary, which should be on page 16 of the report. And so as you can see, we had 84 students that have transferred to RB at some point this summer, and 34 that have exited at some point, for a total of additional 50 students. The 34 is higher than it has been in years past, but in looking at that list, what we've noticed is more than half of those students have transferred out of state, which isn't something we typically see. So that's been a change. And then our current enrollment is 1633, and of those students, 17 of them are alternatively placed due to their learning needs outlined in their IEP. So we have 1,616 students that attend RB on a daily basis. And then you can see the breakdown by class as well. Our junior class is actually our largest class this year. And just as a reminder, our projected enrollment was 1,605.
So Tim, you were off by 11. What was the problem?
Well, do we count, when enrollment is the students who go to the school, or is it the students that are registered at RB but don't go here also?
It includes all students, so
Okay.
it includes the students that do not attend here.
It's in the
every
first
day.
sentence.
So the
1616 are attendance,
1,633.
17 additional to give us the 1663 are outplaced.
But
Yeah,
our
but you
official
said we were
enrollment-
off by 11. Weren't we off
16.
by 28? Because the enrollment's 1630. I'm trying to make sure I understand.
getting
worse, Tom.
Enrollment is 1633, right?
Correct.
Okay. Again, I'm not challenging your estimate. I just want to make sure I understand what we consider enrollment at our school is.
The projection, the primary tool for the projection is to predict to the board as we do the levy and we get ready for the spring budgeting season and staffing, is where we think we're going to need increases in staffing.
Okay.
So the 1616 is what, what we're staffed for, and we were projecting to be staffed for 1605.
I got it.
So the next thing, the next page is page 17, should be the preliminary state level results from our PARCC testing. So this was released last week from the state, and this chart just shows the preliminary results for Illinois. And this is the first release, and this does not include students who received accommodations or students who took the test paper and pencil. These are only including the online test takers. Also, you can see they've categorized it into 5 categories. Students who've exceeded expectations, met, approached expectations, and it goes on. And they've associated a level with each of those. So 5 is the highest level, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And those cut scores were determined philosophically by the committee, based on what they felt students should achieve to be college and career ready. They were not based on the pilot data. So that's why, as you see, 0% of students exceeded standards at the high school level in mathematics based on the cut scores that they've set. So the handout that I gave you just became available earlier this week. This is a sample report that parents will eventually get. We still don't have a timeline as to when they're going to release the results either to the school or to the parents, but this is what the report will look like. So on one side, you can see that they've outlined, identifying what level the student performed at, their specific score, and then they also provide information as to what the cut scores were for each level, along with the school and district average, the state average, and PARCC. And these are just all samples, so none of that is necessarily what the averages actually are. And then on the bottom of that page, it just provides a summary for the parent of where they stand overall in regards to major content, and then for math in regards to the practice standards, which would be reasoning and problem solving. So that's what the report will eventually look like once parents get it. Last year we chose to give this test with sophomores. Other schools chose to give it with freshmen. Other schools chose to give it with juniors. So I think that's where you see, it'll be interesting to see what the actual state results are, because not everybody tested the same grade. It's also important to remember as you look at the preliminary state results that students had no investment in this test. It didn't count for anything. And a lot of districts, students either opted out or finished the test within a few minutes. And so I think that's also why you're seeing some of these results, because until it's tied to college entrance or college placement, students are, or tied something to the school level, students are going to have a hard time really being invested in this test.
So the high school superintendents group, I know I brought this up last year when we were talking about this, the high school superintendents association that I work with, we were strong proponents against the PARCC at the high school level, and we were trying to convince the state board to leave the ACT in place for the high school students, because there was at least some hook with having given an ACT and allowing it to be used for college admittance, and parents knew it, and there was, and obviously the PARCC is what they chose to continue to go forward with. So, we still test all of our juniors on the ACT. Eventually, I'm thinking one of the ways the state's going to try to have schools push the PARCC even harder is that they're going to take away the funding for the ACT testing, which they give us right now. So that might be an expense we'd have to pay on our own. But I think you're seeing, that's why I think they're trying to get this out in front of all the superintendents and parents to prepare them for that if the results come out and they're really shaky.
Also, the state has not determined yet at what levels will be required to give the PARCC test this year. So we're waiting to hear back to see what the state will fund, which will determine at what grade level or what course level we'll be giving the PARCC assessment.
Kristen, I have a question. So when I look at this data, it's skewed. I would expect the first column and the last column to be kind of equal, for kind of a standardized test, but it's not. So are you and your colleagues a little concerned that it's not following the traditional normal curve here?
No, I'm not, because like I said, first of all, they created the cut scores based on a philosophical discussion, not based on the actual data that they had in front of them. And then also, from watching students take the test, I know that's a majority of the students probably didn't give their best effort because it was a long period of time and there was no value in this assessment to them. So
What's the
not
value
that
to us
surprised
again?
by the
So this is not the norm referenced
no.
data? Okay.
What's the value, is there value, is there a carrot or a stick with these PARCCs, or is it
Well,
just?
PARCC is aligned, the assessment is aligned to Common Core, which is more aligned to our curriculum, but I can't necessarily answer your question because I haven't seen the types of information in the reports that we're gonna get at the school level regarding these assessments yet.
No,
So I don't.
That's not what I mean. What I mean is, could we be punished, penalized
Yes,
for
it's a state
funds
it's a
or?
state
Yes.
accountability
I
measure.
mean,
and,
it's- so
You have
they.
to give it.
Correct. They can withhold your
Again,
state funding.
But the results, not, we take the test, we have to take the test. If everybody got, if 100% of our kids were students who did not meet expectation, what do we care?
So they-
Versus what the state can do to
Okay,
us.
so they have talked about creating a system similar to No Child Left Behind, where they look at what percent of your students are at what level, and then trying to improve on that in subsequent years.
Okay.
But that really hasn't been fleshed out in
Okay.
detail.
So right now, there's, I mean, again, we
Yes.
always like students to put their best effort, do the best they can. Your observation is they're like, why take another test? There's no value to me, so it's having an effect. But at the present time, we can't be penalized for the fact that the results aren't as good as we would like.
Correct.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay. So moving on to the accreditation report, which starts on page 18, I believe. So last year, we completed the accreditation process, which is a voluntary method of quality assurance designed primarily to identify schools that are adhering to a set standard. And most schools in the area choose to complete this process through Advanced Ed, which is the non-for-profit, nonpartisan organization that we used. It was formerly North Central Association of Colleges and Schools, which some of you might be familiar with. But most public schools, high schools, have chosen not to go through the accreditation process since they're accredited through the state. We chose to continue the process to get some outside feedback to see, whether we were on track in identifying what we could improve from what we're already doing. So the general overview of the process, the accreditation process involves several steps. The first step was a submission of artifacts that were aligned to their specific standards. Then giving surveys to staff, parents, and students. And this just replaced the 5 essential survey that we have to give every other year. Then after that, we have to submit some sort of student achievement data and analyze that. So we chose to utilize the advanced placement data. And then there's a completion of an external review. And for us, that was conducted on May 4th and May 5th by a team of 5 educators, most of which came from the parochial school setting, because that's typically the schools that are still going through this process. And so the team came in and they listened to a brief presentation by the building administration. They held focus groups and completed classroom observations. But it was still a very brief snapshot of RB. And it was also really poor timing with being the first day of AP testing and having teachers being pulled out, also being the day after prom as well. But regardless, we wanted to take some of the information and look to see if it aligned to things we've already identified and we're already starting to work on, or if there was new information that we weren't aware of. So overall, we found that it really just solidified the areas in which we are already working to improve upon as areas to continue to refine and modify. So the results that they gave us were identified in 3 separate areas. The first one was identified powerful practices, and you'll see that these are things that they've identified that we're doing really well that contribute to our success. So the evidence of Bulldog spirit is pervasive and authentic. One parent said that, my student felt like they were a Bulldog 2 years before they even entered the building. Parents feel empowered by the 2-way communication with the school. Effective and varied use of technology and media resources to communicate and support the school's programs, impressive number of professional and support staff to provide students assistance, and then the physical building and variety of resources provided exemplary supports for student learning. I think we have a phenomenal building. I also think that it partially came from most of the external review team was from a parochial school setting. And several of which that were in the city as well. So I think that had an impact on it. And then the identified improvement priorities are areas of growth that must be addressed within 2 years to retain accreditation status. And this is something that's just a natural part of the process. like, you always have identified areas in which you need to show that you've improved upon within 2 years. So the first thing was to develop common grading and assessment policies and procedures to be followed by all faculty across grade levels and courses. So this is something that we were already aware of and already have been working on. Right now, each course has a certain percentage of the test that's common between teachers. Some of that work had already begun, so we're just finishing up that work this year, and then we'll be implementing those assessments the following year. The second one, and I'll go into more detail in a minute of some of the ways we're addressing, additional ways we're addressing these areas. The second one was to provide training and support to staff in the collection and analysis of data to improve general assessment literacy and inform classroom instruction. And so there was a question now on how does that compare to ECRA, which was the company that we've been working with on assessment. And so that's really targeting how teachers are using the data within their own classroom based on their curriculum and their assessments, whereas ECRA is really utilizing standardized assessment data and looking at a building level to identify students who are not growing as much or who are not meeting benchmarks on those assessments so that we can make sure they're receiving the proper interventions. So that's the difference between the two, and again, that's something that we're well aware of, and so once we have common assessments across the board, we'll really be able to have more general conversations with teachers about, for example, Algebra 1 students in general, what overall are their strengths, what are their areas of concern, and what changes do we need to make in the curriculum because of that. So that's what that bullet point is talking about. The third item is develop and implement a process facilitated by the school administration that provides teachers with more formal and informal feedback on their instruction. So last year we just completed 2 years of the new evaluation process. And so we identified probably after the first year that this was a concern, but we wanted to complete the entire cycle since half of the teachers get evaluated 1 year and half the teachers get evaluated the other year. And so, again, this is something that we were aware of. Also with the new role of instructional coaches and them not directly evaluating their teachers anymore, we knew we would address this. So I'll touch on that in a little bit. And then creating a rigorous program of professional development for all staff members aligned to improvement areas. So this is just telling us to continue the practice of what we're doing of using observations and assessment to drive the professional development that teachers do. So last year we focused on formative assessment, which is within the classroom looking at determining whether or not students learned what they were supposed to that day, and then using that data to modify what happens in the classroom the next day to meet the learning needs of the students. And then technology as well.
The way you explain that some of them, you talk about how of your 4, we knew this was, we're working on it, but the last one you said we're already doing that, but that doesn't appear what the report's saying. It says areas of growth that must be addressed to retain your accreditation. They came to the conclusion we aren't doing this. It's the way I read it.
I'm not sure what you...
I'm
Well-
not sure what you said.
Sari's not understanding what you're doing.
Okay.
So we've already been doing it in the past, but what it's saying is when you start to analyze the new common assessments in number 1 and you start in number 3 to provide teachers with more feedback and do more observations to make sure you're utilizing the information you gained in that
Okay.
to drive professional development.
Okay.
And so the last area that they give you feedback on is identified improvement opportunities, and these are just suggestions. And so the first one is formative assessments, which I just talked about, and that's something that we started to focus on last year. We had Grant Wiggins, who was a big speaker and educational guru, come in and speak to the entire staff, and so we're continuing that focus. It's not something that can be checked off and accomplished within 1 year. And then the other area was to identify goals for department PLCs, which are our Thursday late starts, And we've already done that. Ms. Gregor and I have set specific goals for each professional learning community to really make sure that we're all accomplishing the same thing and being incredibly productive during that time. The last page of the accreditation report just summarizes some additional information and work that we're going to do this year and next year in response to those 4 improvement priorities.
So when it says this is something we put together?
Yes, the second page is something that we put together to address the 4 improvement priorities that they've identified. And like I said, a lot of this is things that we were already planning on doing. There were a few questions, so I won't go through all of it, but one of the questions was about instructional coaches will observe each member of their department in the classroom once per quarter as a way to give teachers more feedback. So last year we had the instructional coaches complete 3 observations a week, and they could choose the teachers that they wanted to go observe within their department. So by changing this structure, it will ensure that each teacher, just from their instructional coach alone, will get feedback once a quarter.
If you're doing 3 a week, there's like 40 weeks in the year. That's like 120 observations. Isn't the largest group of instructional coaches like 10 teachers or something like that? How
Yes.
could they not have done it on a quarterly basis then?
Well, because more focus could have been first quarter on the new teachers and making sure that they had the support they needed, or if a teacher was new to a course. So this just makes sure that at a minimum, teachers are getting at least 4 observations.
I gotta tell you, and I don't want to sound too critical when I make these, but when I read these, some of them like that one, and you tell us they're doing 3 observation a week, and we know that there's no more than 10, it's hard for me to fathom that they didn't see each teacher one time a quarter. Because then that means they saw some other teacher like 30 times during the year, like once a week. That they, as however you would define them, instructional coaches, that they wouldn't, on all those observations, see each teacher at least once a quarter.
On average, that's what it turned out to, but it wasn't specific throughout the year where each quarter they receive feedback. It may have happened 3 times within the 3rd quarter, for example. So we wanted to spread it out so that it would be consistent, that they would be constantly receiving feedback.
And then the other one that, you may or may not comment on this, but, create common quarterly assessments. Again, I feel like there's a disconnect sometimes between all the reports and words and everything you put here, and what do we do? I mean, we don't do common quarterly assessments for our students in the same classes?
No, so not all courses give a quarter assessment. So they give semester exams, but not all courses give an exam at the end of each quarter that summarizes the information that they learned for the entire quarter.
So
and in
again,
those...
So a course may or may not have a quarterly right now, which you may change. But let's say it's English 9, and they have a quarterly. I was reading this different than you. Is it common amongst all the, how many English 9 teachers do we have? Probably 6 or something like that, right?
A certain percentage of it is common, yes. So we're moving to have 100% of it common.
Okay.
But we're also looking if a course doesn't have a quarter
So you're
assessment
doing-
to
okay.
implement a quarter assessment as well.
All right. I mean,
Some of the-
we aren't letting teachers just willy-nilly test kids. English 9, you can have completely different tests for, depending upon which teacher you have, do we?
No, and there's some books that are common, but they don't, the challenge in the past is if, let's say, Great Gatsby was taught.
Right.
One teacher could teach it first quarter, another teacher could teach it 4th quarter
Okay.
because they were sharing resources. So we've streamlined that so all students will read the same book first quarter or 2nd quarter.
Which is a good idea, because then they could talk to their friends about it then, right? Okay, if they're not in the same class. Okay. I'm sorry, Kevin, I didn't
You're
mean to
good.
cut you off.
That's exactly what you're explaining is where we're trying to go from.
Okay.
And then another just overall question was whether or not this would cost money. And so when we talk about the professional development in here, we use Title II professional development money and Title I professional development money. So that's at no cost and no additional cost.
Well, let's stop there. I've asked this to Tim and Kevin before. Let's say we get $20,000 in Title I and II, but to meet this requirement, we need to spend $40,000. I mean, I always got a question there, if we need to do more, professional development, then we get Title I and II, and we say we're going to do it for this accreditation, then are we going to consider spending more than what's Title I and II, or we just spend Title I and II and maybe not meet the requirements of the accreditation?
Right now, we're trying to keep it in Title II, and dedicate all funds to our PD unless Kristen asks for something additional.
Okay,
The original budget right now is limited, so she has all access to Title II,
okay.
which is still about roughly $20,000 of professional development money.
Okay. I got to tell you, the government's not reading what our assessment requires, and I find it extremely difficult when this could believe it's like, because we get 20,000 a title, voila, that's exactly what we need to meet all the requirements we have.
Right, we put together a plan and we prioritize, so when we look at, for example, AP professional development for our teachers, if a teacher's gone the previous year, and, we're short on money, perhaps they don't go the next year as well, so we look at things like that.
A lot of this too, though, with the common assessments and making sure they're covering the common objectives at the same time, is time. So making sure we have dedicated time during institutes for them to work on this. Making sure that we have dedicated time during PLC to work on this. Kylie's been implementing an accountability measure so that we make sure that they're staying on task with the groups are staying on task with their responsibilities. So it's not as much money as it is time.
Got it.
Any other additional questions on the accreditation process?
Great explanation.
Thank you,
I have a
Kristen.
comment and a question.
Yes, Laura.
Are you done? Yeah. I just wanted to make a comment on the identified improvement opportunities that you had on the previous screen on number 1. There is much talk in the media about we're over-testing our students and all we do is test. And I just wanted to highlight that by developing varied formative assessment so that our community understands that we're not developing another test. I thought it was very creative. You have discussions, questions, other way to assess our students, letting everyone know that we're getting out of this testing our students to death. That's the only way of assessing them. So I applaud you and your team for putting that there as an opportunity. And then my question, I just had a question on the other one, on the 2015 to 2016. It said the Dean of Students is going to conduct the informal classroom.
Yes, so during a teacher's evaluation year, they are observed by their evaluator, and then they're also informally observed by myself. So I do all the informal observations of the teachers. So the difference is a formal observation is scheduled ahead of time and it's for the full period. An informal observation is a drop-in, where I can show up at any time for 15 minutes.
That
And
was my question.
So the deans, when the teachers are not going through that process in their off year, they've also gone through the evaluation training, and so they'll do an informal evaluation and drop into the teacher's classroom in the off year to provide them additional feedback.
Okay, so the deans have received, so my question actually was, did the deans receive the same kind of training
Yes.
to assess them as the others?
Right.
Okay.
One thing I started at, and one thing I even did as a principal at Bartlett, and Kristen and I talked about this, is if you put a person in the dean's office and you only allow them to do dean work, they're never going to grow to eventually become an assistant principal or a
Okay.
principal. So we wanted to get them some experience of getting in the classroom and looking at teaching. The next step will be, a lot of times you see their informals will come back, focus more on classroom management and not instruction. So then you start coaching them up on, well, what about instruction,
Right.
not just classroom management. So we're trying to grow and groom our people as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as being a fair evaluation on the off year for our teachers, because if the dean hadn't had the same training as those who are evaluating them on evaluation years, then it wouldn't be helpful for them, in that off year.
So remind us again, Kristen, the formal evaluations are done by all the assistant principals?
Assistant principals and director, so director of special education
Okay.
and then director of
And
student
the
services.
informals then are done by you
Correct.
and the deans?
Me during their evaluation year, and then knew the deans during their
And
non-evaluation year.
you including the assistant dean when you say the deans, is it all three of them or just the two?
No, just the two deans.
Okay, and then, Kevin, do you do
Sometimes I
informal
walk in,
evaluations?
sometimes I do too.
Now, do you, in the formal year, so you don't, do you observe every teacher in the formal year?
Every teacher that's on their evaluation cycle, so that's
But in
about
the-
half the, at least half of the teachers
Around
in the
half,
building.
I assume.
Mhm.
But in the informal year, you don't observe anybody who's not on the formal list?
Correct.
Okay.
Any additional comments or questions from this side?
Just one question, because, as board members, we're required to go to the para training. And so one question, you said you have to observe half. Is it a mandatory 2-year cycle?
Yes.
Okay.
Except
For
for
not- for
non-ten-
tenured teachers.
Non-tenured are every year until they receive tenure.
Wow, okay.
Any other comments or questions on this side?